Hey Jared, real good work with your video so far. I was really I like how you mentioned for your definition of creativity that or what you learned about it was that there's just not one like set definition of creativity. That's just not like it's not concrete. I like how you mentioned that creativity is like defined by the context and interpretation, or that you learned that creativity is defined by the content and interpretation of any given situation. I thought that was pretty nice. Um, One of the myths that you mentioned was actually one of the myths I was surprised about too, but it wasn't one of the myths that I mentioned, at least within my video. But I like how you mentioned that your myth was, or the one that you were surprised by, was that either you're a creative person or not, as well as your reasoning behind it. Because I mean, it is understandable. Like either like you said, like either like sometimes it's a gift that comes with it, or that you're just born with it, which is like understandable. But it's really the fact that anybody can become creativity. You can be what's it called, like train within creativity and try like get that branch. So that was a pretty eye-opening myth. And then for your reasons for why creativity is like important within the company, I thought it was like pretty important, like the facts that you noted. I like how you mentioned that creativity can help companies stay relevant and competitive. And I feel like the biggest one, and you emphasize it on as well, is that it can be really important for adaptability within a company, like adaptable to change, which I feel like is a really important aspect within any company. And further, I like how you mentioned like your example of Apple as being, or how they use creativity to help pioneer their approaches to new devices and new technologies. So, like for example, the iPod and the iPad that you mentioned, I feel like that was a nice touch. And then your real world example of Netflix being like, what's it called, for the creative change process? I feel like that was a really good example. And you mentioned all the four product like stages to like the process. You mentioned the person's process, environment, and product areas. So, for example, you mentioned the persons as Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, and you mentioned the process of how they started as a DVD renting site and then switched over and started converting more into what's it called, a streaming site where they would like people would subscribe for it. The environment that it impacted, well, it impacted. I like how you mentioned that it impacted more like or newer companies or companies that are coming out and then switching from that kind of like renting DVDs to like kind of just streaming services. And then of course you mentioned the product was that Netflix. So I feel like overall, real good video, Jared. So good work.